Our special broadcast on Prime Minister Modi's big America visit. I'm Barkha Dutt. You're with the Mojo story. In a few moments from now, the Prime Minister will be formally welcomed at the White House. But remember, Narendra Modi has already met one-on-one with Joe Biden. Mr. Modi is, of course, a state guest. He will be later hosted at a state dinner, only the third such world leader to be hosted by the Biden administration this time. The other two were, of course, the leaders of South Korea and France. Now, this has been a very, very significant visit because it is coming at a time when there are increasing concerns about China's aggression. But India has continued its path of multilateralism. India has, in fact, often gone from a meeting of the SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, straight to the meeting of the Quad, a loose security organization that includes the United States, Japan, and Australia, apart from India. Now, the meeting is, of course, of enormous strategic importance, but it's also generated a certain amount of debate within America's domestic political context. There are lawmakers who have pushed the Biden administration to talk about what they call democratic backsliding. Will that happen, or will the Biden administration that has rolled out the red carpet keep the focus on business, strategic cooperation, and the big China factor? Let me introduce our guests on the program today. Let's welcome them one by one. We are joined by Dr. Elliot. Dr. Elliot McCarter is a noted Hindi and Sanskrit scholar based out of the United States of America. We're also joined by military veteran General Raj Shukla, strategic affairs analyst. Good to see you, sir. Also joining us is veteran diplomat Ambassador Talmiz, Ahmed. Good to see you, sir. Also joining us is strategic affairs analyst Dr. Kartha. Is good to see you. And Derek Grossman should be with us shortly. I'm seeing Professor D.K. Giri, author and columnist, and we will be joined by strategic affairs analyst Derek Grossman in a moment from now. Now, we'll be cutting across live in a moment, or not in a moment, but in a few moments, when the Prime Minister is received formally at the White House. Let me actually, before I get the hard diplomacy and strategic affairs from Ambassador Talmiz, Ahmed, and other experts, Dr. Elliot, if I may start with you. कैसे हैं और क्या बोलेंगे आप इस विजिट की इंपॉर्टेंस क्या है डॉक्टर एलियट?
मैं बिल्कुल ठीक हूँ, पूछने के लिए बहुत धन्यवाद और यहाँ पर होना बहुत अच्छा लगता है. So thank you. You know, the visit is really important. Every opportunity to deepen ties, at this point, I think in the relationship between India and the United States must be availed. You know, I think the concerns about human rights are significant, and I think that a strong relationship can help address those concerns. So I hope that this visit will not just only increase the strategic partnerships, the business relationships, but also advance human rights in both countries and opportunities for cultural exchange, educational exchange, and increased awareness. Thank you.
And if there was one thing about this visit जो आपको अलग लगता है, जो आपको लगता है कि बहुत अलग है previous visit से, तो आप क्या कहेंगे? I know I'm pushing you a little bit on the Hindi, but I think it's you know, we should exploit your proficiency in Hindi, right?
Oh, you know, I appreciate it, and I'm always happy to be a show pony. But you know, actually, that's really a difficult question for me. I think in terms of previous visits from Indian ministers, you know, I think this is, what is this, Modi's third or fourth or maybe sixth trip to the U.S. I think he's made several. He made a few under the Obama administration and a few under the Trump administration. I think it's notable, though, that this is a state visit. And it's not, though, that it's not the case that Biden has just been handing out state visits. He's been handing them out to very important and strategic partners. And so to bring India to the same status as France and South Korea, two countries which have very long-standing partnerships and friendships with the United States, I think sends a signal to India that America is willing to be a much stronger friend and continuing partner.
Right. Let me welcome Derek Grossman to the program. Derek, I'm hoping you can hear me. Derek, of course, is a senior analyst with the RAND Corporation, and Derek will come to you in a moment. Ambassador Talmiz, Ahmed, we have gone from being a country that some would have sort of said were Russia-leaning to being a country that's America-leaning. But of course, the foreign minister, Jaishankar, calls it multilateralism. How do you see what's happening today and the significance of this moment? Ambassador Talmiz, Ahmed.
The main point to note about this visit is the extraordinary enthusiasm that is emanating from Washington. Normally, the hype is on our side, but this time I have noticed there's an extraordinary hype in the US. There have been articles written in Foreign Affairs and in the mainstream media highlighting the importance of the visit. So, really speaking, this is in the context of trying to get India more deeply engaged strategically with the United States. This has been a long drawn effort going back 20 years, and it has been steadily expanding. But now there is a certain urgency. The United States believes it faces a serious threat, a challenge, possibly a threat from China and Russia working together and reinventing the idea and reinventing the world order and making it more multipolar. They want to resist this. They want to ensure that the world order remains under US hegemony. And they believe that India can be a partner in this regard because of the problems that it is having with China. This is the effort, and this is the core problem. The second effort is to expand defense ties. The Americans have tried very hard over a period of time to dilute our dependence on Russia and to expand American involvement. The problem in this regard has constantly been that the Americans don't transfer technology. And that is why we are not able to move forward. They want to have commercial deals. Also, the stuff that they provide is extremely expensive. But having said this, they have not given up. So you will find that short of a strategic partnership that makes India an ally, which is not going to happen because India still upholds strategic independence, the plan B that they have is with regard to expanding defense ties and to ensure that their arms lobby, which is the most significant entity in the United States and has cross-party support, and indeed it controls the Congress, that is the entity that has to make inroads in our system.
Well, it's interesting. It's interesting that you speak about the Americans pushing for an alliance. I think it's quite evident to anybody, sir, who follows geopolitics that that's not going to happen. In fact, Derek, I wrote a column in the Post called "Sorry, Americans, India will never be your ally." That was his headline, and Ambassador Talmiz reinforced that point and said, well, if the Americans can't have that, they're going to want a kind of defense cooperation. We know that the purchase of armed drones, for instance, is on the agenda. We know that there's a big deal with General Electric that is on the agenda. But what is driving all of this, Derek Grossman? Is it China? Is it the size of the Indian market? What is it? What makes Biden roll out the red carpet?
Well, thanks, Barkha. Yeah, it's great to be on your show. And I think you absolutely hit it out of the park with that Washington Post op-ed. It's clear to those of us who follow this closely that India is never going to be the U.S.'s ally. But I'm not entirely certain that it is clear to to the United States. Now, I think, truth be told, I think the Biden administration is pretty clear-eyed in dealing with India. But there are certainly certain sectors of the federal government, specifically the Department of Defense, and perhaps others, who believe that a closer relationship with India, to include potentially a security alliance in the future, is a possibility. And it's clear from everything that we've seen over the last several decades since the founding of modern India, that is not in the cards. And I do think that it revolves mostly around countering China, and that is kind of part of the context of today. What I would like to see in the future, and maybe we'll get to this during the Biden Modi summit here, is kind of a broader, and I think we will, a broader context for the relationship, so that we're not just talking about China. I mean, we've seen senior Biden administration officials recently talk about, yes, China will be on the agenda, but it will only be a part of the overall agenda. So I think that's a healthy way of talking about it, although I think privately it's clear that the U.S. is trying to bring India along for the ride on China. And India, frankly, is pretty amenable to that, but up to a certain level. Obviously there was the Galwan Valley hostilities back in 2020. I mean, there's numerous issues that India is concerned about with China, but an alliance, no, I don't think so. And I don't think anybody on this panel thinks so.
And I think the question that you raised is, does America get that? And does it even have a choice? Because, as you said, China and the concerns about China are dictating so much of what's happening. What's interesting, Tara, is, of course, you had US Secretary of State Antony Blinken trying to thaw the US-China relationship in Beijing, saying we don't see Taiwan as an independent country. And then Biden calls Xi Jinping a dictator. Now, obviously, Dr. Tara Kartha, India has concerns about China, but India hasn't given up on China. India has had 18 rounds of talks with the Chinese. We continue to be part of a Beijing-led Asian Infrastructure Bank, for instance. What for you will be the benchmark of a successful US trip, Dr. Tara Kartha, from an Indian perspective?
On your show again, Barkha. I saw your article, right? Very nice piece, but I would really differ with you. I don't think either side wants an alliance, right? Neither of them. We are not looking at an alliance.
You don't think the Americans want an alliance? I think the Americans would want an alliance, and India will never give that.
No, India will never give that. But the key to this, I mean, I found that speech by Ed Brookings, I think, Jake Sullivan's speech on that was brilliant. And that actually sets the backdrop for the whole thing. It's not really about, it's China also, definitely. That is a key concern for us. But this is about, one, we are a huge rising market. It's somewhere where investment has to go. America has to grow. You have political stability. You want to call it that, political stability. Modi is going to be around for another 5 years. So these are all things which makes investment. Investment wants stability. They want growth. They don't want conflict. So when I saw the report by Rand, which was an excellent one, extremely well researched, but I'm just, my problem is the kind of war that you're going to see between the US and China is not going to be a conventional war. It's going to be a different kind of, I mean, that's what you saw in the last visit, right? When Blinken went, they're not, you've still got US companies investing in China as recently as, I think, last week, when you had Elon Musk opening a new factory in China. So that thing will continue. So in such a situation, we have space. We are looking for growth. We are looking for technology. We are looking for our startups, for employment. And that is where the US comes in. So the question is not whether India will be part of a war against Taiwan. The question is, what part will India play in a future run-up against China, which is certain. The US run-up against China is certain. What role can we play?
And answer that. I know you have to go, so briefly answer that, Tara, very briefly, and I want to open that up. What role will it play? I mean, it's worth reminding this audience that India flatly refused to put boots on the ground in Afghanistan. India flatly refused to take part in the war against Iraq. I don't see India doing anything militarily in any build-up against the Chinese. I don't see it. Do you?
You just look at the Indian Ocean map from Beijing. You'll see that huge, that peninsula jutting out into the Indian Ocean. That is your answer. You have a lot you can do without really saying anything about it. And that is, each of these agreements which we are going to sign with the US is reflected more or less to different extents in the Quad. This is huge. This is much bigger than just the US in terms of critical technologies, in terms of logistics. It's all reflected across these 4 countries, the same format. 2+2 format is there as well. So think of it as I would agree, we can't have an open fight with China. The US doesn't want an open fight with China either. That will cost them very heavily.
Okay, Tara, I'm going to thank you for your comments. Stay as long as you can. I just want to pick up a question from our audience in the live stream. Saurabh Vishish saying the United States doesn't need more allies. It does not want to get involved in a crisis in East China Sea, the Taiwan Strait, or the Himalayas. It wants existing allies to spend more on defense. General Shukla, I'm going to bring you in. We're not going to get up to the scale Kremlin. We have taken a very, very individual position as a country on Russia. We continue to break records with the oil we purchase from Russia. But that is also because India has been dependent on Russia for defense procurement. I think the United States, a big part of this strategic cooperation, is going to be an attempt to actually change that. Sir, your thoughts on what's happening?
Barkha, I look at the Prime Minister's visit, strictly from the defense or the wider national security standpoint. And in that sense, I think this is celebration time for both the nations. And so just give me 2 minutes, I'll tell you why I think it is celebration time. Majorly because of these two deals, the General Electric FE414 jet engine deal, the General Atomic MQ-9B Predator deal, if they happen, whatever is happening in ISET, now these are early days, but if ISET metamorphoses in what it should be, it might exceed what the Indo-US nuclear deal did. Exceed, and I'm making this point. The Indus, which is basically establishing the defense innovation bridge between the two countries. These four things, along with the great ripple effect which is already happening, the downstream outcomes, they will together ensure that deterrence in the Indo-Pacific strengthens greatly. I also have a submission to make that if we descend these lofty perches of, becoming an ally in strategic autonomy and just focus on doing a lot of commonsensical, everyday stuff, we will greatly strengthen deterrence and those signals will go out to China. These are the assertions I'm making. Now, I'll just take just 1 moment. Please realize that in getting these two deals off the ground, all rules have been shattered to make them happen in record time. So just let me tell you how significant the jet engine deal is. The technologies that are going to get transferred are going to be 80% by value. Not even UK and Canada have been afforded the favor of the courtesy. Along with this deal, 600 MSMEs, some 4 to 5 startups will benefit. 11 advanced technologies, including the absolutely high range, heat suction technologies are being transferred. Who is in this club today in this, shall I say, this dimension of jet engine technology in this realm? They are just 4, US, UK, France, and Russia, not even China. Are you telling me that Russia is not transferring this kind of technology to China? I think it is. So if now we are getting this technology from US, why should we be coy? What will it? It will also do that it will not replace the Soviet or the Russian dependency with the American dependency, but it will create this new technological ecosystem where you will have startups, you will have corporate majors, you will have academia. So all this is going to create an aerospace ecosystem in Bengaluru, Hyderabad, Koraput. This is the kind of stuff that's going to happen. 250 of our aircraft will get the engines today that are powering the Super Hornet, the Gripen. It's absolutely, game-changing technology. And in the shadow of these bigger deals, now this is the point I want to make. This has already happened. The US Space Force, in a cooperative research agreement with an Indian startup, 114 AI, is opening up collaboration on space domain awareness and semiconductors. ITAR clearances are being granted for AI tools for maritime surveillance.
And I hear you, but what does
just
this
one point, Barkha, one last point, just one last point.
All right.
The MQ-9 deal, you have a startup, Indian startup, who is now going to provide precision guided kits for the MQ-9. The MQ-9s have already been leased to us, to are out there in the IOR. 14 million square kilometers is what they are looking into. Now, does India not want these technologies? Do we not want this strategic prowess? This is going to give India deterrence. This is going to strengthen the Indian military's technological makeup. And a technologically enabled Indian military or a technologically enabled strategic military enterprise is in the American self-interest. So I do not see what the quarrel is.
I don't think anyone is saying that there's a quarrel. But before I come to Professor Giri, this is, of course, the Prime Minister tweeting about his upcoming reception at the White House. President Biden has a similar comment out. Derek, Is there a fight? Is there a quarrel? Are there two minds on the hill? Or is India now, frankly, too big, too important, too critically strategic to be either able to ignore or to be able to nudge, even on some typical questions? You've had a bunch of lawmakers in America write and say, bring up human rights, bring up the democracy question. This is not a government and this is not a country that is going to take lectures from Washington. How does the Biden administration handle that?
Well, I think the Biden administration's already decided what they're going to do. They're going to press ahead regardless of the criticism from numerous human rights groups, as well as some representatives in Congress, about inviting and feeding, Modi to this lavish state dinner, and opportunity to brief a joint session of Congress. I mean, look, Barkha, this is all about, strategic interests at this visit specifically, right? And as I said earlier, to bring India in as this enormous counterweight on China's western flank is an enormous victory, really, for the U.S.'s Indo-Pacific strategy to counter Chinese coercion and assertiveness throughout the region. And that is what the Biden administration has decided it wants to hang its hat on. I have some, I guess, fairly limited reservations about that. Others have far more reservations about it because we simply don't know where this is going in India. Modi is almost certain to get reelected next year. I think everybody on the panel would agree with that. And the concern is that domestic politics in India are such that essentially the BJP dominates and is not, respecting the rights of minorities and press freedoms and other things. Now, that said, when you kind of look at the universe of U.S. allies and partners, I think India is hardly the worst. Okay, there's certainly others that are far worse on those counts, right? But when you think about a state dinner, we've only done now 3 under the Biden administration, right? The first and second were for France and South Korea, respectively, right? So those are pretty tried and true democratic allies of the United States. India kind of stands apart from those in some respects. And so I think that's why you're seeing some of the angst. But again, the Biden administration has completely gone full on into India is the future of the 21st century, especially.
Yeah. And I would say, and I'll take that back to Ambassador Talmiz in just a moment, but Professor D.K. Giri, we are live on those pictures from the White House. You see Vice President Kamala Harris there. We are expecting a formal reception for the Prime Minister in a moment from now. But I want to bring you in. I think it's quite interesting that there's still the op-eds of the liberal media, the Washington Post, the New York Times, saying Joe Biden's got to push the Modi government on issues of religious minorities, on issues of democracy. You have 3 or 4 left-leaning lawmakers who've said, we're not going to attend. We're not even going to go in and listen to the Prime Minister as he speaks to the US Congress. But my feeling is that Indians across party lines would not appreciate, even those who are critics of Modi, might argue, let us criticize him. Who are you? Who are you to criticize him? We'll criticize him at home if we need to. Do you see this becoming a big issue? What for you is the most important element of this trip, Professor Giri?
Well, that is not going to be an issue in an intergovernmental relationship. You see, the US administration may informally raise it with Modi, but never on record, because it is a manifestation of realpolitik. Even a country like Sweden, which is an exemplar of social democracy in the world, they said, how do we balance trade with human rights? So when the governments talk, they talk of their national interest, and that is trade and strategic interest at the moment. And let me also say that US and India inevitably will become allies. There is no choice, but they are fumbling on both sides. But it will lead, the geopolitical reality will lead them to become an ally. I have been arguing that India should go for a formal alliance with Americans. Multilateralism is utopia. Let me tell you, Jaishankar, I don't know where he has studied the history. Tell me since Second World War, where the world was multipolar.
You want the Indians to join?
It was always bipolar.
from Second World War onwards. Tell me
India
one
will
thing.
India will say we should be a pole. Why should we
So
be a
no,
member of
but
an alliance?
that is too ambitious. Barkha, tell me in one time in world political history when the world was bipolar, I mean multipolar. It is an utopia. Were we non-aligned ever? We are never non-aligned. It was again an utopia. So strategic autonomy is an utopia in an interdependent world. America should realize that. America's problem is they create a Frankenstein, they go to fight it. Afghanistan, Iraq, and wherever. So they do not understand India's concerns as well. Whether India should also be very clear about what they want. You cannot run with the hare and hunt with the hound. You see? So the point is you have
so
to
you
make
want the Indians to pick a side, and you want that side to be the United States of America.
Absolutely. I have written several articles, and I have said there is no choice. Americans have no choice.
Okay. I'm just smiling because very few people say this. The Indian consensus. If there's a Washington consensus, there's a New Delhi consensus, and the New Delhi consensus says we ain't taking no sides. Now, Ambassador Talmiz Ahmed, I want to bring you in. Sorry, General Shukla, I know you have your hand up. Give me just a second to get the ambassador in. And look, everyone, feel free. If you have something to say, just raise your hand and we'll come to you. As we await the ceremonial welcome, and we'll have the sound up on that in a moment from now, Professor Giri says, hey, listen, don't live in this theoretical little imaginary world of yours. Pick a side. Pick a side. China is your biggest adversary. There is no multilateralism. That's the textbook phrase. Get real. What would you say, Talmiz?
The world has been multipolar for at least 10 years, if not longer. By multipolar, I mean there's a whole series of nations who are asserting their role in world affairs, quite independently of the two major powers that have emerged. The world is not bipolar, it is already multipolar. You have seen this with regard to the Ukraine war. Numerous countries of Asia and Africa and Latin America have not supported the American side with regard to sanctions and have not given them political support. The overwhelming criticism of the American policy has been, don't push this binary upon us. Don't force us to make choices we don't want to make. Whether it is the ASEAN or it is Northeast Asia or South Asia, West Asia, and all the other countries. So we are already in a multipolar world order. It's the Americans who are trying to prevent this by pushing this bipolarity onto the world, and nobody is buying it. The only nations that are part of the American complex today are these Europeans. And I will tell you very frankly, and I have said this earlier, it's not going to work. It's not sustainable. The Europeans are not a united entity. They have their own interests internally, and I am not sure many of them are particularly thrilled with the kind of posture the Americans have imposed on Ukraine. There is a need for a ceasefire that is well recognized in Europe, and they also have suffered very seriously. I'm also a little perturbed about the very enthusiastic support for defense cooperation with the United States. It is not the business of the Indian Armed Forces to be screaming from the rooftop about one particular engagement. We must be very objective here. We have not seen any evidence of serious transfer of technology by the Americans. Let us be very clear on this. Let us not imagine a kind of El Dorado, a magic wand will occur overnight and suddenly these wonderful toys will start coming into the Indian market and the Indian armed forces will become the greatest in the world. This is all rubbish. No, the Americans, I am also concerned about the Indian Ocean. We have screamed from the rooftop about the Chinese intervention in the Indian Ocean. And are we comfortable with everyone else coming in? You have the Americans already dominating the Indian Ocean. You have the British coming in. You have the French coming in. You even have the Germans who barely have a navy coming in. India is being cornered in its own region. But we are so focused, or rather our lobbies have made us think about only one concern, one rival, that is China.
I've got to ask you this before I take your very provocative. We've had two very provocative arguments. Professor Giri saying, go for the Americans. Ambassador Talmiz sort of cautioning against expecting real security sort of knowledge transfers. Ambassador Talmiz Ahmed, surely we can't be dependent on the Russians. Why is Vladimir Putin somebody we want to trust? I mean, he's an out-and-out dictator.
We buy 45% of our requirements from Russia. It used to be 60 or 70%, already 45%. We have diversified quite significantly. I believe we should buy. I am not a technical expert, so it's not my business to say whether we should buy this or that. I also believe that correct procedures should be followed before we finalize contracts. There are far too many people hanging around in Delhi and in Washington, arms lobbies, promoting a certain thing. And I don't take it as a great advantage to our national interest if certain procedures are short-circuited in order to accommodate a certain
Okay. Hang on. Before we all start arguing amongst ourselves, just for a second, I know General Shukla wants to come in, Professor Giri. Derek will have a lot to say. Elliot is like, what's going on here? But there's a lot else to talk about as well. Can we just cut across to those pictures? Can we go live there full frame for a second? Can we take that and have the sound up and just see what's happening? Can we have the sound up, please? We can hear the Doordarshan commentary. That's absolutely fine. Can we have the sound up?
नरेंद्र मोदी का आगमन हो चुका है वॉशिंगटन डीसी व्हाइट हाउस में और अमेरिकी राष्ट्रपति जो बाइडेन और फर्स्ट लेडी जिल बाइडेन प्रधानमंत्री का स्वागत करते हुए सबसे पहले अपने मंत्रिमंडल और विशिष्ट मेहमानों के साथ प्रधानमंत्री का परिचय करवा रहे हैं राष्ट्रपति जो बाइडेन, उपराष्ट्रपति कमला हैरिस से हैंडशेक करते हुए प्रधानमंत्री और ये सभी विशिष्ट अतिथि जो राष्ट्रपति जो बाइडेन के मंत्रिमंडल के विभिन्न सदस्य।
और ममता, ये बहुत महत्वपूर्ण है कि पीछे से आवाज सुनिए आप। मोदी मोदी भारत माता की जय के नारे सुनाई पड़ रहे हैं। जिस मिनी इंडिया का हम जिक्र कर रहे थे, विदेश मंत्री के साथ में प्रधानमंत्री मोदी का ये हैंडशेक और इसके अलावा रक्षा मंत्री के साथ में प्रधानमंत्री, अमेरिका के रक्षा मंत्री के साथ में प्रधानमंत्री का मुलाकात और ये तमाम विशिष्ट लोगों के साथ में अमेरिका के राष्ट्रपति अपने प्रतिनिधिमंडल से मुलाकात करवाते हुए इसके बाद में भारतीय प्रतिनिधिमंडल से अमेरिका के राष्ट्रपति की मुलाकात। सबसे पहले विदेश मंत्री डॉक्टर एस जयशंकर, NSA विदेश सचिव, उसके अलावा एम्बेसडर जो अमेरिका में है, तमाम वरिष्ठ अधिकारी भी मौजूद प्रतिनिधिमंडल में, जिनके साथ में दोनों ही नेताओं की मुलाकात। और ये बेहद महत्वपूर्ण, क्योंकि इस मुलाकात के मायने बहुत कुछ है। संभवतः यहाँ वो जिस बात का हम जिक्र कर रहे थे, 21 तोपों की सलामी से लेकर तमाम वो प्रोटोकॉल जो एक राजकीय अतिथि के लिए किया जाता है, और पीछे से भारतवंशियों की वो गूंजती आवाज सुनाई पड़ेगी।
Distinguished guests, the national anthem of the Republic of India, followed by the national anthem of the United States.
All right, let me just step in there. We saw the strains of Yankee Doodle there as the ceremonial welcome is ongoing. We will cut back if the Prime Minister or the President should speak. We were having a heated debate before that, and I think Professor Giri was wanting to come in. Derek, I'm just adding Derek back there, was also wanting to come in. But General Shukla, I think we'll give first dibs to Elliot and then come to General Shukla. Elliot, go ahead.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. I do have to leave for a flight. We have a conference for the South Asian language teachers in America coming up, and I must go to Madison, Wisconsin this weekend. Language teaching is an important job. I just wanted to leave with a comment that we should remember the role of the Indian community in America.
Welcome, Mr. Prime Minister.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Elliot. I'm going to have to cut you
Welcome
short.
back to the White House. I've long believed that the relationship between the United States and India is will be one of the defining relationships of the 21st century. Two proud nations whose love of freedom secured our independence, bound by the same words in our Constitution. First three words, we the people. The enduring ties and shared values between our people and the shared responsibility as global leaders to tackle the great issues of our time together.
स्वागत है प्रधानमंत्री जी आपका पुनः आपका लौटने के लिए मैंने हमेशा विश्वास किया है कि संयुक्त राज्य अमेरिका और भारत के मध्य यह रिश्ता 21वीं सदी के परिभाषित संबंधों में से एक है। दो गौरवशाली राष्ट्र, हम इन तथ्यों से बंधे हैं और यहाँ हमारी स्वाधीनता के प्रेम से ही हमने अपनी स्वतंत्रता प्राप्त की है। हमारे जो तथ्य हैं वो हमारे संविधान के पहले शब्द यही हैं, हम देश के नागरिक, हमारे लोगों के बीच स्थायी संबंध और साझे मूल्य और वर्तमान के महान मुद्दों से निपटने के लिए वैश्विक नेताओं के रूप में हमारी साझी जिम्मेदारी।
I'm honored to be the first to have you here in 15 years. The United States is honoring and hosting an official visit to the Republic of India. Prime Minister Modi, welcome back to the White House.
मैं सम्मानित हूँ कि लगभग 15 वर्षों में पहली बार संयुक्त राज्य अमेरिका भारत गणराज्य के लिए एक आधिकारिक राजकीय यात्रा की मेजबानी कर रहा है। प्रधानमंत्री मोदी जी, व्हाइट हाउस में आपका स्वागत है।
We spent a lot of time together going back to when I was vice president and you had just become prime minister. And since I've become president, we've continued a relationship built on mutual trust, candor, and respect. The challenges and opportunities facing the world in this century require that India and the United States work and lead together, and we are.
बहुत समय एक साथ बिताया है, उस समय से जब मैं उपराष्ट्रपति था और आप अभी प्रधानमंत्री बने थे, और जब से मैं राष्ट्रपति बना हूं, हमेशा इस रिश्ते को जारी रखा है हमने। और जहां हमारा इसमें आपसी विश्वास, स्पष्टवादिता और सम्मान है। इस सदी में जो चुनौतियां और अवसर विश्व के सामने हैं, यह आवश्यक है कि भारत और अमेरिका एक साथ काम करें और नेतृत्व करें, और हम कर रहे हैं।
With your partnership, we've invigorated and elevated the Quad between the United States, India, Australia, and Japan to advance our vision of a free, open, secure, and prosperous Indo-Pacific. Decades from now, people will look back and say, the Quad bent the arc of history toward global good, as the Prime Minister describes it.
आपकी साझेदारी के साथ हमने एक मुक्त, खुला, सुरक्षित और समृद्ध हिंद प्रशांत की दृष्टि को आगे बढ़ाने के लिए संयुक्त राज्य अमेरिका, भारत, ऑस्ट्रेलिया और जापान के मध्य क्वाड को मजबूत और उन्नत किया है। अब से दशकों बाद लोग पीछे मुड़कर देखेंगे और कहेंगे, क्वाड ने इतिहास के वृत्तचाप को वैश्विक हित की ओर मोड़ दिया, जैसा कि प्रधानमंत्री इसका वर्णन करते हैं।
Together, India and the United States are working closely on everything from ending poverty and expanding access to health care, to addressing climate change, to tackling food and energy insecurity stoked by Russia's unprovoked war in Ukraine.
साथ साथ भारत और संयुक्त राज्य अमेरिका हर विषय पर मिलकर काम कर रहे हैं, जैसे कि गरीबी को समाप्त करना और स्वास्थ्य देखभाल तक पहुंच का विस्तार, जलवायु संकट को संबोधित करने से लेकर खाद्य और ऊर्जा असुरक्षा से निपटना, जो यूक्रेन पर रूस के कारण युद्ध से प्रभावित हुआ।
We made critical and emerging technologies the pillar of our next generation partnership to ensure that these technologies promote and protect our values, remain open, accessible, and trusted and secure.
हमने महत्वपूर्ण और उभरती प्रौद्योगिकियों को अपनी अपनी पीढ़ी की साझेदारी का एक स्तंभ बनाया है, यह सुनिश्चित करने के लिए कि इन प्रौद्योगिकियों हमारे द्वारा हमारे मूल्यों को बढ़ावा और सुरक्षा मिलेगी और यह खुले, सुलभ, विश्वसनीय और सुरक्षित रहेंगी।
All this matters for America, for India, and for the world. We face an inflection point, one of those moments that only come around every several generations, when so much is changing technologically, politically, socially, and environmentally, that the decisions we make today are going to determine our future for decades to come.
यह सब बहुत महत्वपूर्ण है अमेरिका के लिए, भारत के लिए और सारे विश्व के लिए। हम एक मोड़ का सामना कर रहे हैं, ऐसे क्षण जो हर कई पीढ़ियों में केवल एक बार आते हैं, जहां बहुत कुछ परिवर्तित हो रहा है, तकनीकी रूप से, राजनीतिक रूप से, सामाजिक रूप से और पर्यावरण की दृष्टि से, कि आज हम जो निर्णय लेंगे वह आने वाले दशकों के लिए भविष्य का निर्धारण करेंगे।
And as democracies, we can better tap into the full talent of all of our people and attract investments as true and trusted partners as leading nations, with our greatest export being the power of our example. Equity under the law, freedom of expression, religious pluralism, and diversity of our people. These core principles have endured and evolved even as they have faced challenges throughout each of our nation's histories, and will fuel our strength, depth, and future.
लोकतंत्र के इस रूप में हमने सभी लोगों की पूर्ण प्रतिभा का बेहतर तरीके से लाभ उठाया है और हम उठा सकते हैं, और अग्रणी देशों के रूप में सच्चे और विश्वसनीय भागीदारों के रूप में निवेश को आकर्षित कर सकते हैं। हमारा सबसे बड़ा निर्यात हमारे उदाहरण की शक्ति है। कानून के तहत समानता, अभिव्यक्ति की स्वतंत्रता, धार्मिक बहुलवाद, हमारे लोगों की विविधता, ये मूल सिद्धांत दृढ़ हैं और विकसित हुए हैं, यहाँ तक कि जब उन्हें चुनौतियों का सामना करना पड़ा है हमारे प्रत्येक देश के इतिहास में, और दूर भविष्य तक हमारी ताकत को ये ऊर्जा प्रदान करेंगे।
And they form a special bond among our nations, forged by the special bond among our people, based on values that are universal, a duty to family and elders, treating all people with respect and dignity, a premium on education and creativity, self-discipline, hard work, entrepreneurship, faith and service to community, courage and resilience, and tolerance and opportunity for all.
और ये हमारे राष्ट्रों के बीच एक विशेष बंधन बनाते हैं, हमारे लोगों के बीच विशेष बंधन द्वारा निर्मित उन मूल्यों पर आधारित जो सार्वभौमिक हैं, परिवार और बड़ों के प्रति कर्तव्य, सभी लोगों के साथ सम्मान और गरिमा के साथ व्यवहार, शिक्षा और रचनात्मक पर बढ़ोतरी, आत्म अनुशासन, कड़ी मेहनत और उद्यमशीलता, विश्वास और समुदाय के लिए सेवा, साहस और लचीलापन, सहिष्णुता और अवसर।
I've seen this dynamism in my visits to India. I see it in Indian American diaspora. It reflects every part of American life and remains a bridge between our nations and only grows stronger with each generation. We see it with record numbers of Indian Americans serving in the United States Congress. We see it here at the White House, where proud Americans with Indian heritage serve our country every day, including our Vice President of the United States, Kamala Harris.
मैं यह गतिशीलता देखी है। मैं इसे भारतीय अमेरिकी प्रवासियों में देखता हूँ, जो अमेरिकी जीवन के हर भाग को दर्शाता है और हमारे राष्ट्रों के बीच एक पुल बना हुआ है जो प्रत्येक पीढ़ी के साथ निरंतर मजबूत होता है। हम इसे संयुक्त राज्य कांग्रेस में बड़ी संख्या में देखते हैं और हम इसे यहाँ व्हाइट हाउस में देखते हैं, जहाँ भारतीय विरासत के साथ गर्वित अमेरिकी हर दिन हमारे देश की सेवा कर रहे हैं और जिनमें उपराष्ट्रपति कमला हैरिस भी शामिल हैं।
The granddaughter, the proud granddaughter of Indian civil servant, daughter of an Indian student, turned American scientist, who came to the United States when she's only 19 years old to pursue her dream of curing cancer. A family like so many of ours in our nation that speaks to the thousand stories of determination, courage, and hope.
एक भारतीय समाज सेविक की पोती, एक भारतीय छात्र जो अमेरिकी वैज्ञानिक बनी, जो 19 साल की उम्र में संयुक्त राज्य अमेरिका आई थी कैंसर के इलाज के अपने सपने को साकार करने के लिए, उनकी बेटी। हमारे देशों में बहुत सारे परिवारों में से एक जो हजारों दृढ़ संकल्प, साहस और आशा की कहानियां कहते हैं।
Stories that define the relationship and the limitless possibilities between the United States and India, two great nations, two great friends, two great powers that can define the course of the 21st century. Mr. Prime Minister, thank you for your partnership, and I'll turn it over to you.
परिभाषित करने वाली कहानियां और संयुक्त राज्य अमेरिका और भारत के मध्य असीम संभावनाएं, दो महान राष्ट्र दो अच्छे मित्र, दो महान शक्तियां, यह 21वीं सदी के पाठ्यक्रम को परिभाषित करेगा। माननीय प्रधानमंत्री जी, आपकी साझेदारी के लिए धन्यवाद। अब मैं आपको सौंपता हूं।
Distinguished guests, the Prime Minister of the Republic of India.
राष्ट्रपति बाइडेन, फर्स्ट लेडी डॉक्टर जिल बाइडेन, डिस्टिंग्विश्ड गेस्ट, उमंग और उत्साह से भरे हुए इंडियन अमेरिकन मेरे प्यारे साथियों, आप सबको नमस्कार। सबसे पहले तो मैं राष्ट्रपति बाइडेन के मित्रतापूर्ण स्वागत और दीर्घ दृष्टिपूर्ण संबोधन के लिए उनका हृदय से बहुत बहुत आभार व्यक्त करता हूं। थैंक यू प्रेसिडेंट बाइडेन फॉर योर फ्रेंडशिप।
President Biden, First Lady Dr. Jill Biden, distinguished guests, friends from the Indian American community filled with energy and excitement, a very good morning to all of you. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude to President Biden for his warm welcome and his far-sighted speech. Thank you, President Biden, for your friendship.
फ्रेंड्स, आज व्हाइट हाउस में शानदार स्वागत समारोह के एक प्रकार से ये भारत के 140 करोड़ देशवासियों का सम्मान है, 140 करोड़ देशवासियों का गौरव है। ये सम्मान अमेरिका में रहने वाले 4 मिलियन से अधिक भारतीय मूल के लोगों का भी सम्मान है। इस सम्मान के लिए मैं राष्ट्रपति बाइडेन और डॉक्टर जिल बाइडेन का उनके प्रति हृदय से बहुत बहुत आभार व्यक्त करता हूं।
Friends, this grand welcome ceremony at the White House today is an honor and pride for 1.4 billion people of India. This is also an honor for more than 4 million people of Indian origin living in the US. For this honor, I express my heartfelt gratitude to President Biden and Dr. Jill Biden.
फ्रेंड्स, करीब 3 दशक पहले एक साधारण नागरिक के रूप में मैं अमेरिका यात्रा पर आया था और उस समय मैंने व्हाइट हाउस को बाहर से देखा था। प्रधानमंत्री बनने के बाद तो मैं स्वयं तो कई बार यहां पर आया हूं, लेकिन इतनी बड़ी संख्या में इंडियन अमेरिकन समुदाय के लिए व्हाइट हाउस के द्वार आज पहली बार खोले गए हैं।
Friends, about 3 decades ago, I came on a visit to America as a common man. At that time, I had seen the White House from outside. After becoming the Prime Minister, I have come here many times, but today, for the first time, the doors of the White House have been opened for the Indian American community in such large numbers.
भारतीय समुदाय के लोग अपने टैलेंट, कर्मठता और निष्ठा से अमेरिका में भारत की शान बढ़ा रहे हैं। आप सब हमारे संबंधों की असली ताकत है।
आज आपको दिए गए सम्मान के लिए मैं राष्ट्रपति बाइडेन और डॉक्टर जिल बाइडेन का हृदय से अभिनंदन करता हूं। उनका जितना धन्यवाद करूं उतना कम है।
The people of the Indian community are enhancing India's glory in the US through their talent, hard work, and dedication. You are the real strength of our relationship. I thank President Biden and Dr. Jill Biden for the honor you've been given today. I think I can't thank him enough for this.
फ्रेंड्स, भारत और अमेरिका दोनों के समाज और व्यवस्थाएं लोकतांत्रिक मूल्यों पर आधारित है। दोनों देशों के संविधान, उसके पहले 3 शब्द, और जैसा राष्ट्रपति बाइडेन ने अभी जिसका उल्लेख किया, वी द पीपल, हम दोनों देश अपनी विविधता पर गर्व करते हैं। हम सर्वजन हिताय सर्वजन सुखाय इस मूलभूत सिद्धांत में विश्वास रखते हैं।
The societies and institutions of both India and the US are based on democratic values. The constitutions of both countries begin with the following 3 words: we, the people, as President Biden just mentioned. Both of our countries take pride in their diversity. Both of us believe in the fundamental principle of in the interest of all, for the welfare of all.
पोस्ट कोविड काल में वर्ल्ड ऑर्डर एक नया रूप ले रहा है। इस कालखंड में भारत और अमेरिका की मित्रता पूरे विश्व के सामर्थ्य को बढ़ाने में पूरक होगी। ग्लोबल गुड के लिए, वैश्विक शांति, स्थिरता और समृद्धि के लिए दोनों देश साथ मिलकर काम करने के लिए प्रतिबद्ध है। हमारी मजबूत स्ट्रेटेजिक पार्टनरशिप डेमोक्रेसी की ताकत का स्पष्ट प्रमाण है।
In the post-COVID era, the world order is taking a new shape. In this time period, the friendship between India and the US will be instrumental in enhancing the strength of the whole world. The two countries are committed to work together for the global good and for global peace, stability, and prosperity. Our strong strategic partnership is a clear proof of the power of democracy.
फ्रेंड्स, अब से कुछ ही देर में राष्ट्रपति बाइडेन और मैं भारत अमेरिका संबंधों और अन्य क्षेत्रीय और वैश्विक मुद्दों पर विस्तार से बातचीत करेंगे। मुझे विश्वास है कि हमेशा की तरह आज भी हमारी बातचीत बहुत सकारात्मक और उपयोगी रहेगी। आज दोपहर को मुझे यूएस कांग्रेस को एक बार फिर से संबोधित करने का अवसर मिलेगा। इस सम्मान के लिए मैं आपका हृदय से आभारी हूं।
Friends, in a short while from now, President Biden and I will discuss India-US relations and various regional and global issues. I'm sure that, as always, our conversation today will be very positive and useful. This afternoon, I will also have an opportunity to address the US Congress for a second time. I am deeply grateful for this honor.
मैं यही कामना करता हूं और 140 करोड़ भारतवासी भी यही कामना करते हैं कि भारत का तिरंगा और अमेरिका का स्टार एंड स्ट्राइप हमेशा नई ऊंचाइयां छूते रहे। राष्ट्रपति बाइडेन, डॉक्टर जिल बाइडेन, एक बार फिर आपके स्नेह भरे निमंत्रण के लिए, आपके गर्मजोशी भरे स्वागत और आतिथ्य सत्कार के लिए मैं आपका और 140 करोड़ हिंदुस्तान वासियों की तरफ से आभार प्रकट करता हूं। जय हिंद। गॉड ब्लेस अमेरिका। बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद।
I wish for, and the 1.4 billion people of India wish with me for India's tricolor and America's stars and stripes to always keep flying higher and higher. President Biden, Dr. Jill Biden, once again, I thank you for your kind invitation, for your warm welcome and hospitality, also on behalf of 1.4 billion people of India. Jai Hind, God bless America. Thank you very much.
President Biden making those opening remarks, and thank you. We have some of our guests from our last hour also still with us, and we have new guests joining us as well in moments from now. I want to welcome to the program Ambassador Arun Singh. I want to welcome to the program David Frum, senior writer at The Atlantic. We still have Professor Giri, General Shukla, and Dr. Elliot MacArthur with us, and in a moment from now we'll be adding other guests as well. Christiane Carroll at the Washington Post, Joe Walsh, former American presidential candidate, will be with us in a moment from now. Elliot, जाने से पहले आप कुछ कहना चाह रहे थे about the Indian American community? Go ahead.
I did, and thank you for bringing me back briefly. I was a Dale Earnhardt fan. I'll just drive fast to the airport. Anyway, my comment would be that I think Modi and Biden both hit on in their speeches is that it's important to remember the role of the Indian community in America. They're an important group in domestic elections, and they're much more divided in their support of Modi. The diaspora community, if anyone, I think, will have an important role to play in discussions that are related to rights of minorities, and perhaps even the message that one of the greatest strengths of a democracy and a democratic nation is its diversity. So thank you very much. Aapka bahut dhanyavad.
Have a safe flight. Thank you for being with us. Welcome, everybody, to the program. If you've just joined us, the Prime Minister has been welcomed ceremonially at the White House. The two anthems have played out in their opening remarks. Both leaders have spoken about democracy, we the people, the opening words of both of our constitutions, shared values, and of course, both have referenced the Indian American community, Biden making a reference specifically to Kamala Harris and her Indian ancestry. Like I said, we were having a very animated debate actually about whether a multipolar, multilateral world is even possible. We had Professor Giri saying, pick a side, pick the Americans. Ambassador Talmiz, Ahmed getting very agitated about that. But let's get the big picture. General Shukla is still with us. General Shukla, let me give you the first word because you were waiting a long time. You were with us from before, and then I'll get the others in. General Shukla, go ahead.
So I'll pick up from where the debate was left off. And we were talking about multipolarity, actually.
Yeah.
I think what the External Affairs Minister, Mr. Jaishankar, was emphasizing was multilateralism, where he was saying you maximize leverages from all relationships. But once again, I was saying that let's be commonsensical in our foreign policy, descend from these lofty Brahminical platforms and get into Punjabi-ish, which is common sense. It is more, it delivers better. And in that sense, you just see what is multilateralism. If you get cheap Russian oil and ice it into a technology relationship, where is the problem? Also look at this issue of values. I mean, values are of course important. We have our perspective on values. America has its own perspective in values. We all have our problems with values. There's no point in raising them in this platform. But look at the larger issue. We are up against China, which has an entirely different value system. So I think as President Biden and the Prime Minister just said, if the two democracies get together, aggregate their power not to jackboot around the world, but to radiate deterrence in a very sophisticated sense, why is that power not good? Remember, if you have power, your values rule, else you submit. So even for the values debate, you need power. And this is, Ambassador Ahmed made that point. And very respectfully, so senior. What I just wish to say is we have to start looking at a new strategic outlook. In a military which is structured in character and profile to protect a $3 trillion economy is very different from military we need to protect a $35 trillion economy. In that sense, the GE engine deal, Indus, the whole ISET, and ISET has not yet delivered. It's just very prospective. These are very essential to India's national security makeover. Why should we, be coy about this? And the last point I'd like to make it, look at the strategic opportunity. Just when America has realized what China is doing today, in 44 key technologies, who rules? 37 China rules, not America. 37. In Taiwan, in many military contingencies, the Americans are worried that if the Chinese rocket force opens up, 90% of their aircraft will be taken on ground. So the consequence of, the innovation and all this stuff, at the end of the operational pipeline, these are the things that are happening. And therefore, India and US need to get together. We do not need to abandon our strategic autonomy to do that, nor do we need to get into an alliance. And look at what are you talking? This is India, which is a heavyweight, 142 crore, fifth largest economy, second largest military. Who can shove us this way or that? We will walk along with the Americans when we need, and we may or may not cross over if the situation doesn't arise. So all that it is doing is that this is strengthening deterrence. What is wrong with strengthening deterrence? One last point I make. You see, in the other domains, look at millet, look at green hydrogen, look at DPI. India is so ambitious. We want to be number one, this, that. In the national security space, when will we ever get ambitious? And so these two deals, Indus and ISET, are great game changers in that sense. Also, one last point I'd like to make, it is just not we who need the Americans need us. Just let me give you a piece of statistics, and I think this is John Thornton. This is the reality of the world order today. I'm told that in the sanctions against Russia, out of 170 countries in Africa, Latin America, Asia, the Indo-Pacific, West Asia, only 5 have joined the sanctions. Japan, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, and Singapore. Now, that's the reality of the world. So we are up, I would say, against a serious challenge, China, and we need to realize that the challenge is here and now. So we need to deliver faster. We need to be far more fleet-footed, and that is what this visit is going to do.
Okay. I'm going to say thank you at this point, General Shukla, and go on as we look at and analyze and pick up from where you've left off, Ambassador Arun Singh. Let me bring you in right away. The big question: how far does this relationship go beyond the rhetoric, beyond the ceremonial sort of welcome? What is it all about? Interesting to see both leaders reference democracy. There's been a lot of sort of op-eds out in the Western press. We have Christiane Carroll here of the Washington Post, the New York Times. Both have pieces on pushing sort of Biden to raise issues of democracy with the Modi administration, with the Modi government. And we know that India will not react well to that. It is unlikely that any public commentary certainly will be made. You have some lawmakers actually boycotting the US Congress sort of address. That's one aspect of it. The other aspect of it is for only the third world leader to be hosted as a state sort of guest, addressing the US Congress for the second time. The White House doors open for an extremely successful Indian American community. I think we should underline that as well. What's your big takeaway from what you've seen thus far, Ambassador Arun Singh?
Thanks, Barkha. So 2 aspects. One, clearly the relationship is poised to be launched to another level in terms of economic, technological, and security partnership. This has been enabled by the earlier effort and earlier opportunities that had been done by the Civil Nuclear Cooperation Agreement in 2008, which had allowed access to higher levels of technology in the US. You would recall that till 2008, we hardly bought any defense supplies from the US. Now we have contracted to buy more than $20 billion worth of defense supplies from the US, and an additional $3 billion are in the works for drones. We are talking of defense technology partnerships. So all that was enabled by that particular agreement. I think the next big step that was taken was what President Biden and Prime Minister Modi did in May 2022, when in their joint statement in Tokyo on the margins of the Quad Summit, there were 2 paragraphs referring to a partnership in critical and emerging technologies. And after that, the 2 national security advisors met in January in Washington and then 13-14 June in New Delhi to launch this major initiative for a partnership in critical and emerging technologies, artificial intelligence, quantum, cyber, 6G, commercialization of space, semiconductors, and defense. that is really taking the relationship to another level. And ISET has become the new organizing framework for the partnership. You're talking about GE now announcing that it will transfer technology and do production in India of jet engines, something that they had not agreed to when the matter was raised in 2014. And it is ISET that has now enabled the US system to allow it to go through. In fact, in the White House statement that was put out after the January meeting, it was specifically mentioned that they will work to expedite the processing of ISET. So I think what we should look out for, and now you're seeing the announcement on semiconductors. You're seeing the announcement related to cooperation in space. So what has happened is that the framework of ISET is a signal from the top levels of the government, from the national security advisors, the national security establishments, to other parts of the government, to business, to academia, that from the national security perspective, we encourage this cooperation. And at a time when the US is blocking this cooperation, for example, with China, it's a very important signal. So that's one aspect. Second, you referred to the concerns and questions being raised about democracy and whether the US will raise it, not raise it. Look, all societies have challenges. And if you look at the US itself, institutionalized racism in the US, voter suppression in the US, redistricting of districts to favor certain parties, what happened on Capitol Hill in January 6 in 2021 to prevent a peaceful transfer of power. So, each country can, point a finger at the other in terms of challenges they may have. And I think that's why I think, as I understand it, the US approach is that have a dialogue as among friends and, it's talk in general terms about all societies needing to work to strengthen democratic functioning, strengthen human rights observance everywhere. And, you can't take a hectoring approach to any other country. And that's a far more productive way to address any challenges related to this.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point, because I think the India of today will say, don't lecture us, talk to us as equals. I just want to welcome Joe Walsh, who's, of course, a former presidential candidate, a big Trump critic, lapsed Republican, if I may call him that, at least the Republican Party under Trump. Joe, welcome to the program. I'll come to you in just a moment. I want to bring in David Frum. David, there's a disconnect between what's happening at the White House and what the media is writing about. Literally every single sort of editorial is talking about the democracy question, Lord India, but push Modi on democracy. You've had Obama in an interview to Christiane Amanpour also talk about religious minorities in India. And you have the White House. It's like there's a dissonance. There's a dissonance between the media pushing for a certain kind of conversation and the Biden administration. And how do you see sort of this dissonance? Is the China factor, is the size of the Indian market, is the success of the Indian American community basically going to be the all prevailing narrative out of the White House? What do you see? David Frum. Give us a second. We need to unmute you. Can we unmute David Frum, please? Oh, David, you're muted at your end. Can you? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
In public, I think the tone will be entirely congratulatory and positive. In private, there will be discussion of important disagreements that have arisen between India and the United States. And I would say the relationship right now does have strains, and the whole purpose of a visit like this is to deal with the strains. And let me revert to some. I think American concerns are not just about internal democracy in India, but about India using Indian law to try to police the international internet, to talk about what may or may not be discussed. And the question is, will India follow the example of China and become a place where they have a separate national sub-internet that is sealed off from the world at the control of the Indian government? I think there are going to be important environmental discussions. India is now the world's third largest emitter of greenhouse gases after the United States and China. But India is rising more rapidly than anybody in its greenhouse emissions. The uses of coal in India is going to be a problem. There are in the realm of security. I think India's stance on the Ukraine war has shaken a lot of American hopes for the future direction of Indian policy. It can't be that the relationship is going to be one where the United States supports India's security needs against China, but India keeps entirely its own counsel and doesn't cooperate with anybody else when other people have security needs. So I think those are going to be some of the major points of friction, but they will be behind the closed doors, not in public.
Before I open this up, I just want to bring in Ambassador Arun Singh to take that on, that this isn't just about like sort of wading into the democratic debate within India or the debate, the political debate within India. This is also about the global internet. This is also about saying, hey, if you want us to stand up with you when China comes and squats on your territory, you've got to do the same for us. Now, we are a country that went from hosting the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Foreign Minister Summit straight to the Quad. And we have called that our right, our strategic autonomy. How do you respond to what David just said, Arun?
So Barkha, I just said that, and I have been commenting and writing on this with some regularity, that the India-US relationship is inevitably going to consolidate. There is a lot of strategic convergence. There's a lot of economic, technological opportunity. Many of the US companies are getting cutting-edge design and technology work done in India. So there's a lot of, human capital that is really working for joint purpose. Now, having said that, we have to allow space to each other for difference of opinion on some issues. Our geographical location is different, historical experience is different. We should not expect that we will agree on everything. Now, if looking at it from the Indian perspective, does the United States always do with Pakistan what India wants? Why did the United States just a few weeks ago authorize a $450 million sustainment package for the F-16s with Pakistan, which Pakistan only uses against India? And they are doing it because they want access to the Pakistani leadership. They want Pakistan to allow their drones to overfly Pakistan, to go to Afghanistan for counterterrorism purposes. The US has certain compulsions based on which it acts, and it is contrary to India's interests. And India has to understand that in the context of the overall relationship, there are certain things that you have to accept where you're not in agreement. For the very same reason, the United States has to accept that there will be issues on which India will have a different point of view. More than in today's context, if you look at closest allies and partners of the United States and long-standing allies and partners of the US, they have not gone along with the US. Israel, a very strong partner of the US, has not gone along with the United States on Russia because Israel needs Russia in the context of what it wants to do in Syria. Turkey, a NATO ally, has not gone along with the US on Russia, Ukraine. Hungary has not allowed membership so far of Sweden in NATO and has not gone along with the US on Russia, Ukraine. So the US has to understand, or what Saudi Arabia is doing with China. So US has to understand that in today's global context is different from the bipolar context, it's different from the unipolar context, with huge contestation playing out today, that closest partners and allies of the US will not always agree with the US policy choice. And sometimes the US policy choice inevitably has proven later to be wrong. For example, in Iraq, US intervened and India opposed that. And then subsequently, India was proved right. So US should not accept that anything that the US system decides is the perfect answer and everybody must fall in line. So
I'm glad you raised Iraq, because we do now know that the Americans and it was under Bush, and I'm sure David will have something to say about that later, were keen that the Indian military support that war, and Atal Bihari Vajpayee, who was Prime Minister then, said no, and it turned out to be the absolutely correct decision. So thank you, Ambassador Arun Singh, for flagging that. Let me bring in Joe Walsh now at this point. Joe, you find yourself in a very interesting position. You're a Trump critic. You don't like the direction of where the Republicans are going, but you've seen the American left basically, it's been a little predictable. Bernie Sanders, AOC, among those who have today said, no, look, we're not, we're going to criticize the Prime Minister of India while he's visiting us. We don't agree with his policies. And it's, standing on the center right. How do you see what's happening, Joe Walsh?
Good to be with you. Look, I agree with much of what the ambassador said. I agree with much of what my friend David Frum said, in that there's a very different conversation publicly and privately. Look, here's the deal. India is our friend. India is our ally. The leader of India, Modi, has systematically
attacked democracy in his country now in a very methodic fashion over the last number of years. President Biden and America privately, at least right now, need to make that clear that that's a real concern of ours. I think that's really important for Biden to convey. The world's a complicated place. Oftentimes your friends and allies, right, are people in countries who may not have the same concept of freedom and democracy that we have. I get that. But what Modi has done in India, when it comes to democracy, is a real concern and should be a real concern. And I hope that Biden conveys that.
Let me push back just a little bit and say, whatever be anybody's views on Narendra Modi, Indians would turn around and say a couple of things, and I imagine this is what they will say. Not that I speak for anybody, I'm just guessing. They would say, listen, our transfer of power from one election to the other is actually much smoother than you guys. Look what you guys did at the Capitol Hill. Look at the January 6th insurrection. Your guys lost an election and wouldn't accept it. Our guys go home and say, congratulations, well done to the opponents. Modi regularly loses state elections, right? When he wins fair and square. I'm just giving you a counter view here. And finally, the Indians would say, why should we be lectured by you? You are no longer the global sort of arbiter of democracy in the world. You've got to get off your high horse. What will you say to that?
Well, we should never be on our high horse. And I agree with you that, and David Frum would agree with you as well. We've got real concerns about the state of our democracy in this country. But we're talking about January 6th. We're talking about Donald Trump, a former president who did refuse to accept the will of the people. But and America stood up to that. And that's very different than the ruling government right now in India systematically attacking the legal structure, attacking the press, attacking a lot of the institutions in India so as to limit and marginalize democracy in that country. So look, we should live in a world where Modi and Biden can have a very frank talk in private. And Modi should be able to, feel very free to give his concerns about the state of democracy in America. But we are still the great arbiter of democracy in this country. And I just hope Biden conveys his concerns to Modi.
Okay, so very interesting. Over the last, I think, 2 hours, we've had such different perspectives depending on who you speak to. General Shukla, welcome back to our broadcast. Christian, let me get you in. I have a feeling, and I could be wrong, that what's going to overshadow the conversation at the White House is not the democracy debate that papers like the Post and the Times have been writing about, but it's going to be China. China, and just the size of the Indian market, transfer of sort of technology, selling armed drones, getting the Indians to somehow be less dependent on Russia for defense procurement. Do you believe that there are two kind of different parallel universes that looking at this visit, the media, the liberal media, and actually the Biden administration, and there's no convergence between these two conversations?
Well, I think the media have actually done a pretty good job, actually, of covering the contradictions, or one might even say the hypocrisy underlying American policy towards India. I've seen a lot of exploration of criticisms of Modi's policies domestically in India, and I've seen a lot of, I think, fairly nuanced coverage of how the United States, how the Biden administration is trying to finesse the concerns it may have about those issues while simultaneously building up a very constructive relationship with India. I think the coverage has actually been fairly nuanced and aware of the subtleties of this situation. Coverage of the letter of the congressional letter that you mentioned earlier, which was somewhat critical of Modi's record at home toward his opponents in particular, I think has kind of reflected that. I haven't really seen any media coverage just say, oh, Modi's terrible, we shouldn't be talking to him at all. I think there's quite an awareness that if you want to counter China, you need to figure out some sort of way of maintaining good relations with India, and you may not always be in a position to lecture India about things that are happening there. So I think it's actually, I'm actually rather intrigued by the way that a lot of the American media have been covering this visit. The coverage is very complex, I think befitting the complexity of the situation.
Let me take that to David Frum, and then I'll come to you, General Shukla. David, what's at the heart of this relationship? What is at the heart of it? On this trip, what are both leaders going to be looking at that's at the centerpiece of it?
Yes. I think what is at the heart of it is the question of how do we even talk about what this relationship is? It's not an alliance. It's not a partnership. It's not even, there are certainly a lot of friendly people-to-people connections, but relationships between the Indian state and the American state are not especially close. There isn't a lot of information sharing, and there aren't a lot of agreements. But there is a list of shared common perception of threat, and the United States has been building on that shared perception since really the Clinton years, when President Clinton began the reorientation of U.S. policy closer toward India. It was developed very emphatically under George W. Bush, a lot of technology sharing. President Obama continued it. It's now, however, become a little bit more complicated because while it's very clear to Americans what India thinks the United States can do for India, it's been harder and harder to say, well, okay, we got your list, fine. What about our list? And it's not a question here of being lectured. It's a question of being presented with a list of demands, wishes, and very little reciprocation when reciprocation is needed. And we see that on Ukraine now. We've seen that on other issues in the past. It's got to be a relationship of give and take. But from an American point of view, it's mostly a relationship of take.
I want to give that to Ambassador Arun Singh and then to General Shukla because Arun, you've lived and served as ambassador in Washington. Did you get that kind of cynicism that like David is bringing up now? One of the things, for example, that is often like I was looking at a research paper from Stimson Center that actually shows that if you look at the Quad, Japan and Australia are much closer aligned to voting on the side of the United States at the UNGA than India, that has voted with the Americans only 20% of the times. Now, Indians are going to turn around and say, hey, that's us. We choose our positions based on an issue. David is saying, okay, so what's in it for us? What's your answer? Hang on, sir. We can't hear you. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Unfortunately, I disagree with what David's assessment is. It is a very, very strong partnership. And I think US is also recognizing that in today's multipolar context, alliances are not necessarily the way to go and to go with strong partnerships. And I'll give you some examples. We have signed a whole host of agreements. 2016, we did the logistics support agreement with the United States for the militaries. And there's a lot of cooperation based on that. 2018, we did the communication compatibility and security agreement. And after that, the communications between the militaries have really picked up. 2020, we did an agreement of sharing on geospatial information. And that has been very useful to both the militaries, particularly in the maritime domain. US now does more military exercises with India than with any country outside NATO. India does more military exercises with the US than with any country, and these exercises are building in complexity and building towards interoperability. So there is a lot going on. And now in terms of take, when I was in the US, I visited Silicon Valley very often. And I could see that Indian origin tech entrepreneurs, Indian origin tech workers, Indian origin CEOs were an integral part of US global leadership in innovation. Even today, leading US companies, jet engines, semiconductors, are getting cutting edge R&D and development work done in India. It's not Indian IP, it is US IP, but the work is happening in India. They're employing 5,000, 8,000, 10,000 people. So the Indian human capital is very important for US to continue to have its global leadership in innovation in the global context. And that's why today when China is posing a major challenge to the US, aside from the security challenge, an economic challenge, a technological challenge, and in many of the critical edge technology areas, China is actually ahead of the US. And US recognizes that partnership with India, with the Indian human capital, is critical for the US to maintain that lead. So there is a lot of take in this for the US. It just doesn't play out the same way in the public domain.
Shukla, you've been making a big case about the strategic cooperation. There's some sort of American skepticism that India can't have it all our way. What would you say to that? This is, of course, the meeting on at the Oval as we speak, the formal bilateral meeting between our two leaders. Go ahead, General Shukla.
So see, I'll just make a couple of points. You read Tanvi Madan's The Fateful Triangle, how China shaped Indo-US relations. China has always been a factor, right from the Cold War. I can give you a number of instances. So to say that China has suddenly become a factor in the Indo-US relationship is escaping from reality. Two, alliances. As I think Ambassador Arun Singh said, let me give you two more examples. What is the response of two treaty allies, Japan and Korea, in a Taiwan contingency? There's a lot of strategic commentary doing the rounds that Japan has said that in an amphibious assault against Taiwan, we will not step in. Korea has said we have North Korea to take off. So even alliances are no guarantee. What these four things will do is that they will strengthen these two powers for deterrence, which in my view is good enough. Even the Chinese are not foolish. Once they read these deterrence signals, they will. Now the question is what Ashley raises when you spoke about debates. And I think he raises a very valid point. He says the American fear is that, or the American wishes, that this deterrence should translate into operational collaboration. So that if deterrence fails, we should be able to defeat China. Now that is something that the Americans cannot impose on us. Just like I say that do we want American blood and treasure when it comes to a Sino-Indian conflict? No. Why should we expect blood and treasure from them? We are the second largest military. But if we can get technology, and now see what are the difference in technology? I just make this one point. Russian military, 42% platforms, very good. Take it to 50. Take from the Americans what the Russians cannot give you. The Russian military doesn't have a Silicon Valley. It doesn't have an innovation system which empowers the military. That was one of the reasons why the Soviet Union collapsed. So what the Americans are going to give us in the strategic military enterprise is this innovation system. So we are taking from each what we need, and we will reciprocate in good measure to the extent that we can. And just one last point, I like to reiterate this, that even as we debate, should we not, please remember that the Chinese military juggernaut is growing in strength. So all I say is, and look at how these debates started. Just give me 1 minute, because it's very important to understand. When the Cold War ended, that was the precise moment when the Chinese stepped up the game in terms of defense investments, transformation. Look what happens in the Indian context. Kick lighter proposals. We just begin to explore defense cooperation. NSS, we dialogue the BMD. Civil nuclear deal, of course, it legitimizes the nuclear program. It pushes up to sharpen the embrace against rising China. The DTTI was killed by bureaucracies. So the nature of democracies is that they are slow. We must now realize that here is a customer which is a tough customer, wily customer. So just the last point, why can't the world's oldest and largest democracy gather their strategic wit to deliver better than China?
Let's bring in Christian and Joe and then come back to David. Christian, you did want to make a point. I'll add a question of my own. You had American Secretary of State in Beijing on the weekend. So before Biden decided to call Xi Jinping a dictator, it looked like the Americans were trying to thaw their relationship with the Chinese. From an Indian perch, the Americans do what they need to, changing their positions frequently as it suits their national interest. Why would you expect India to do anything different? When I say you, I don't mean you, Christian. I mean the American establishment. Christian, go ahead.
I'm not sure I see the contradiction. Of course, the United States should be talking with China, not least to minimize the possibility of military conflict. I would assume Americans speaking with China is also in India's interest, because India doesn't have much interest in seeing the Chinese and American navies go at each other in the Indo-Pacific space. So I don't really see any contradiction there. I just wanted to come back to David's point that, there is a lot of frustration in Washington about some of the things India is doing. For example, I urge your listeners to look at this really amazing piece that the New York Times just published about how India has been profiting from the sanctions on Russia. It's a really remarkable article, and it details just how much oil India has been buying from the Russians and how that has actually affected world oil prices. So, and the fact of the matter is that is an irritant in the India-U.S. relationship, and that's something that Washington isn't really enjoying seeing. So, I mean, this is the sort of thing that will complicate the relationship, even as we try to build a more constructive relationship. Sure, America gets some things from its relationship with India, but that particular point is exactly, and of course, coupled with the larger refusal of India to censure Putin in any way, that's the kind of thing that will keep the relationship very, very complicated. That's just a fact of life.
Okay, let me bring in Joe, and I can see Ambassador Arun Singh probably itching to react to some of that. But Joe, the Indians would say, and I've actually seen this happening once. It's very interesting that Barack Obama made a big point about democracy in an interview with Christiane Amanpour. But I remember when Barack Obama was president, he came on to India. He had a great set of meetings with Prime Minister Modi. And then just before he was leaving, he did this public event where he drove home the point about India's constitution guaranteeing religious pluralism. Except that he then took the flight from Delhi to Saudi Arabia, which is neither a democracy nor pluralistic. And Indians, even critics of the Modi government, turned around and said, really? And I think that's what a lot of people in America don't get, that there is a different India today that isn't going to, irrespective of how much we may criticize our politicians at home, is probably going to close ranks when they see duplicity. And I think there's a dissonance there. But do go ahead, jump in, and then I'll get Arun Singh to comment on the Russia, Ukraine, and the oil sort of debate. Go ahead, Joe.
And I'll just go back to the beginning, this issue of an alliance or a partnership. I think we are strong partners with India. And that's why, again, it's especially disappointing to see one of our partners go down this authoritarian road much further than we are comfortable with. The other point I'd make is Russia's invasion of Ukraine was a big deal. And it was really important for countries around the world to publicly stand with whatever side they're with. And it's been disappointing that Israel hasn't publicly chosen to help this worldwide coalition against Russia. And it's been disappointing, and it will be a huge disappointment to America that India has not been more forceful and has not stood with the worldwide coalition against Putin. Not just reflective of what that means to America, what that means to the rest of the world. I think that's a much bigger issue at play here.
Okay, Ambassador Arun Singh, we've got about 10 minutes. I want you to pick up the oil debate, right? We've heard Foreign Minister Jaishankar saying, okay, if you don't want us to buy Russian oil, lift the sanctions, get the Iranian oil into the market, get the Venezuelan oil into the market. Why would we not buy oil that is cheaper for our people? But Christiane's point on it was very interesting, that this is a real point of disagreement. Ambassador Arun Singh.
So I think it's a more complicated picture than what Christiane indicated, because even today, Europe buys more oil and gas from Russia that India is doing, despite cutting down. The second, when Europe cut down its purchases from Russia, they started picking up oil from the Gulf, which was India's traditional source. Now, when that source was not available to India, India couldn't just say that, we give up on our energy needs and we will not care about the energy needs of the people of India. So then India had to look for the alternative. And many Western analysts themselves have now pointed out that being able to access the Russian oil and it coming to the market brought some measure of stability to global oil prices. Otherwise, the level of inflation, including in US and Europe, would have gone up. Recession in Europe would have taken even a bigger strength. And then whatever India has been getting from Russia has been at prices below the cap that US and Europe have set. So even though that's not a UN related cap, even though it's US and Europe cap, India has observed that. And then India has based, as you would have seen, processing some of that oil, supplied products to Europe, meeting European requirements at prices that the Europeans have found very useful. And then under European regulation, when you do substantial processing, then it is not considered Russian oil. So there is a very complicated picture. It's very simplistic to say that India is benefiting from Russian oil. India has to maintain the energy needs of its people and is meeting the norms and standards that the US and Europe themselves have set about how to handle this particular oil. Now, in this question of censuring Putin, for various reasons, 60% of our defense inventory is still of Russian origin. So you don't want to be in a situation where, and US would not India to be in a situation where it is not able to stand up to China's unilateral and assertive behavior on the India-China border. But beyond that, India has now said repeatedly that it supports sovereignty and territorial integrity of countries. That is an indirect criticism what Russia has.
I'm so sorry to interrupt you. Before I take last comments, we have comments inside the Oval at the White House. Can we listen in, please? Can we have the sound up on that?
Years ago, when I visited Mumbai as Vice President, I emphasized how important it was for India and the United States to continue building a partnership, small steps at a time.
10 साल पहले करीब जब मैं इंडिया गया था मुंबई में, तो मैंने कहा कि भारत और अमेरिका के लिए कितना जरूरी है कि एक-एक कदम करके हम अपनी भागीदारी को आगे बढ़ाते जाएं.
Over that past 10 years, those small steps have transformed into large progress.
और समय के साथ-साथ वो जो छोटे-छोटे कदम हमने उठाए बहुत बड़ी प्रगति का रूप लेते हैं.
And today, the partnership between our countries is stronger than it's ever been.
और आज हम दोनों देशों के बीच में जो सहभागिता है पहले से कहीं अधिक मजबूत है.
We see it in our major defense partnership, now a pillar in Indo-Pacific peace and security structure. We see it in our economic ties and efforts to promote inclusive economic growth for our people and, quite frankly, people all around the world.
और सिर्फ अपने लोगों और समस्त विश्व के लोगों के बीच में भी देख रहे हैं कि एक समावेशी और आर्थिक विकास के प्रति हमारे आर्थिक संबंधों में आती हुई गहराई और प्रगाढ़ता को आगे बढ़ाकर दिखा रहे हैं.
And we see it in our growing cooperation on a whole range of issues: space, emerging technologies, clean energy, global infrastructure.
और इससे हम देखते हैं बहुत से अन्य मुद्दों पर जैसे कि हमारे सहयोग के रूप में अंतरिक्ष से लेकर के उभरती हुई टेक्नोलॉजी प्रौद्योगिकी में साफ ऊर्जा तक और साथ ही हमें बुनियादी ढांचे में.
I want to thank you, Mr. Prime Minister, for your decision to hosting the G20 this year, focusing more on the challenges that matter not just to you and I, but to all of us.
और माननीय प्रधानमंत्री जी, मैं आपका बहुत आभार व्यक्त करना चाहता हूँ कि आपने G20 में इस वर्ष जो आपने नेतृत्व किया है और विश्व का ध्यान उन चुनौतियों की तरफ केंद्रित किया है जो कि हम सबके लिए बहुत महत्वपूर्ण है.
I look forward to discussing how we can strengthen our partnership and build a future together worthy of both our peoples, one grounded on democracy, human rights, freedom, and rule of law.
आज मैं आपके साथ चर्चा करने के लिए राह देख रहा हूँ कि किस तरह से हम आपकी और अपनी सहभागिता को और मजबूत कर सकते हैं और एक साथ मिलकर एक ऐसा भविष्य तैयार करें जो हमारे लोगों के लिए और अधिक बेहतर हो. एक ऐसा भविष्य जो लोकतंत्र, मानव अधिकारों, स्वतंत्रता और नियमों पर आधारित हो.
Welcome again, Mr. Prime Minister. We have a big agenda to continue to build our progress. Again, step by step, continue to build.
तो माननीय प्रधानमंत्री जी, एक बार फिर से आपका बहुत बहुत स्वागत है और मुझे हमारे सामने बहुत बड़ी कार्यसूची है इस समय पर जिसमें काम करना है, अपनी प्रगति के मार्ग को बढ़ा के जाना है, एक एक कदम उठाकर. धन्यवाद.
राष्ट्रपति जी, मैं आपका हृदय से बहुत बहुत आभार व्यक्त करता हूँ और डॉक्टर जिल बाइडेन का भी हृदय से आभार व्यक्त करता हूँ जिस प्रकार से आपने गर्मजोशी से मेरा और हमारे डेलीगेशन का स्वागत किया. और विशेष रूप से मैं आपका आभार व्यक्त करता हूँ आज आपने व्हाइट हाउस के द्वार भारतीय समुदाय के लिए खोल दिए और हजारों की तादाद में भारतीय समुदाय अमेरिका भारत की भावी रणनीति के साक्षी बनने के लिए आज हमारे बीच मौजूद थे।
Your Excellency President Biden, I once again express my heartfelt gratitude to you and to Dr. Jill Biden for the hospitality and the respect that you have shown to me and my delegation. And more importantly, because you opened the doors of the White House today for the Indian American people, and they were there in thousands to witness the future of our strategic partnership.
एक्सेलेंट, आप हमेशा भारत के एक बहुत अच्छे शुभचिंतक रहे और जब भी आपको जहां भी अवसर मिला है, आपने हमेशा भारत और अमेरिका के संबंधों के महत्व को बहुत बड़ा बल दिया है, बहुत बड़ी ताकत दी है। और मुझे याद है कि 8 साल पहले यूएस इंडिया बिजनेस काउंसिल को संबोधित करते हुए आपने एक बहुत महत्वपूर्ण बात कही थी और आपने कहा था, आवर गोल इज टू बिकम इंडियाज बेस्ट फ्रेंड। ये आपके शब्द आज भी गूंज रहे हैं। भारत के प्रति आपकी यही व्यक्तिगत प्रतिबद्धता हमें अनेक बोल्ड और महत्वाकांक्षी कदम उठाने के लिए प्रेरित कर रही है। आज भारत अमेरिका स्पेस की ऊंचाइयों से समुद्र की गहराइयों तक, एंशियंट कल्चर से लेकर के आर्टिफिशियल इंटेलिजेंस तक हर क्षेत्र में कंधे से कंधा मिलाकर चल रहे हैं।
Your Excellency, you've always been India's friend and well-wisher for a very long time. And whenever you have got an opportunity, you've always given force and strength to our bilateral relations. Excellency, 8 years ago, while addressing the US-India Business Council, you had said, our goal is to become India's best friend. And it is this personal commitment of yours towards India that is inspiring us to take many bold and ambitious initiatives. Today, India and the US are walking shoulder to shoulder in every field, from the depths of the oceans to the heights of the skies, from ancient culture to artificial intelligence.
डिप्लोमेटिक दृष्टि से जब किन्हीं दो देशों के बीच संबंधों की बात की जाती है, तो अक्सर औपचारिक जॉइंट स्टेटमेंट, वर्किंग ग्रुप्स और एमओयू उसी के दायरे में आमतौर पर बातचीत होती है। इसका अपना महत्व है ही, लेकिन भारत और अमेरिका के रिश्तों का असली इंजन हमारे मजबूत पीपल टू पीपल संबंध है। और इस इंजन की एक जोर भरी दहाड़ हमने अभी बाहर व्हाइट हाउस के लोन पर भी सुनी।
Excellency, whenever there is talk of relations between any two countries from a diplomatic point of view, people often talk about some form of joint statements, working groups, MOUs. All these definitely have their own importance, but the real engine of the Indian-US relationship is our strong people-to-people ties. And we just heard a spirited roar of that engine out on the White House grounds.
Excellency, जैसा आपने कहा, मैं उसे फिर से दोहराना चाहूंगा। आज की तेजी से बदल रही वैश्विक स्थिति में सभी की नजर विश्व के सबसे दो बड़े लोकतांत्रिक देशों पर है, भारत और अमेरिका पर है। मेरा मानना है कि हमारी स्ट्रेटेजिक साझेदारी मानव जाति के कल्याण के लिए, वैश्विक शांति और स्थिरता के लिए, लोकतांत्रिक मूल्यों में विश्वास रखने वाली सभी ताकतों के लिए बहुत ही महत्वपूर्ण है और पहले से कहीं ज्यादा महत्वपूर्ण है। मुझे विश्वास है कि हम मिलकर पूरे विश्व के सामर्थ्य को बढ़ाने में अवश्य सफल होंगे।
Your Excellency, as you said, and I would like to reiterate that in today's rapidly changing global situation, all eyes are on the two largest democracies of the world, India and America. I believe that our strategic partnership is important for the welfare of the humankind, global peace and stability, and for all countries believing in democratic values. And this is important than ever before. I'm confident that working together, we will be successful in enhancing the strengths of the whole world.
आज हमारी बातचीत में हम ऐसे ही कई मुद्दों पर बात करेंगे और अपने स्ट्रेटेजिक संबंधों को नए आयाम से जोड़ेंगे। मैं एक बार फिर आपको आपकी मित्रता के लिए हृदय से आभार व्यक्त करता हूं।
We will talk about many such issues today. We will add new dimensions to our strategic partnership. I once again express my heartfelt gratitude to you for your friendship. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, we are expecting a joint press conference perhaps in an hour from now. Let's take last comments from our guests as we wind up this leg of our special broadcast. David Frum, it's over to you. Last thoughts. Obviously, for the cameras, there's going to be a lot of sort of formal protocol-driven comments. We saw both leaders were actually had written comments that they reference. What's the most prickly thing, and what's working, what's not working?
Well, you saw it there in President Biden's remarks. He said small steps add up to big progress. And that's a very good way of saying these steps are very small. And we have just made another small step. I think the big issue for the future to watch out for is the issue of emissions, which follows from India's energy needs. The United States, of course, is producing 14% less emission than it did at its peak 2005. Even China, its emissions output has more or less flattened over the past decade in total terms. India, the Indian economy is growing fast. India has a growing population, but India's carbon emissions are also growing very fast. And that's going to be a challenging issue that is sooner or later going to run into some kind of tariff protection or something from the United States, EU, UK, and other developed countries.
General Shukla, last thoughts? So you're on mute. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. We can hear you.
So, is the Indo-US relationship entirely one way? I would think it is not. So let's look at this Predator deal. So the Americans were kind enough to lease 2 Predators to us after Galwan. We are going to strike a $3 billion deal with them. So there is reciprocity. And the second point in this is where India needs to change. Now, this is very significant. India has been used to the old Soviet system of, government to government transfers, PSU to PSU dealing. Here we now need to develop a new commercial outlook, which means what? Recognizing the fact that much of these technologies come from IPRs, which are owned by US business companies. So a business case has to be created around this. Here, the whole Indian defense ecosystem has to change. We must reciprocate by providing business opportunities for the technology that is being given to us. This is going to be very difficult. And the last point I'd like to make is that while there are many irritants in the relationship, it would seem to me that the apex leadership, the defense ministers, the NSAs do understand that nothing must come in the way of our strategic travel, strategic convergence. It is the debating societies below, like you and me, who don't seem to have got it.
All right, Christiane, last thoughts, and we have one of our viewers saying that the GOP is more transactional and the Democrats are in human rights overdrive. That's a perspective from one of our Indian viewers in the live stream. I just thought I'd pick that up. It's actually interesting. Indians have sometimes argued that the Republicans are better for the relationship than the Dems, but within America, of course, Indian Americans tend to lean towards the Democrats. So that's an interesting point. We just lost Arun Singh. If we can get him back for a last comment, but Christiane, let me give you the last word in the meantime. Christiane?
Yes. Well, I would just say I think India and the United States do have a lot of shared interests, but I think it's important to stress that it's going to be a rocky relationship. It's not always going to be seamless. And yeah, maybe Republicans will be better at cultivating that relationship. As we've seen, though, they've also sometimes had a tendency to act out in foreign policy in ways that aren't necessarily going to be in India's interest. So I think Indians should remain very clear-eyed about that as well.
All right, we will leave it there. This is going to be a long night for those of us in different time zones tracking this meeting in the United States of America. There is a lots more ahead. There's a joint press appearance. There's a state dinner. There is the address to the U.S. Congress, and there'll be a lot more to actually talk about as those details emerge. Right now, I think we've seen only the ceremonial, in a way, part of the visit. The real meat of it is going to take place behind closed doors, and we want to thank all of you for your time. to Christian Carroll, to David Frum, to General Shukla, to Ambassador Arun Singh, and earlier to Joe Walsh, and to our audience. The broadcasting continues at the Mojo Story. We will have continuous live coverage, so do keep watching, and thank you for staying with us. See you soon.
It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.